Okay, don't know where to start. I probably should give some kind of introduction, but I don't want to. It's a surprise to me. I always hate it when I'm introduced as someone who is a legend in this Agile stuff. And what I've learned from this is if you just hang around and don't go away long enough, you'll become a legend. I got my start at the first company I worked for doing extreme programming was in 2000, and it's cool to be here with Joshua because Joshua was there too at both of our first start with extreme programming. I think Joshua had a little bit of a head start even before I did, and it's come a long way. I was listening to what Edwin said that when we look back at the slide, you presented that Cope presented, correct? That we're building on top of a foundation that lots and lots of other people have built on top of. And you said something to the effect of we're standing on the shoulders of giants. For me, I've always felt I've succeeded by standing on the toes of giants. And, well, let's see if I can dig in. You can tell I'm juggling lots of notes here because I've got about an hour and a half worth of stuff to talk about and only 45 minutes to do it. So I want to talk about one of the things that's becoming more and more important. Agile is evolving. Agile is a different thing today than it was a long time ago. Agile in 2000 solved a lot of critical problems. And today we're doing a pretty good job at tackling those problems that Agile has solved. And, well, we're starting to move past that. I'm also excited to see Joshua speak tomorrow because he's going to, I think, bookend this pretty well and talk about what we mean by contemporary Agile. Look, I cut and pasted this last night that look, the first principle in the Agile Manifesto is that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, I've gone back and forth with lots of Agile Manifesto signers, and we're never quite sure who we meant by customer, whether it was the company that hired us, whether it was the people that buy our products. But look, all of you consider yourselves a customer for just a minute, and think of a product, a thing that you use that you love. And think about, well, what you would tell somebody if they were to ask you about the product, if you were to recommend it. And I am pretty confident that you're not going to say, I love this product because it has a lot more features than all the other products do. Definitely not going to say, I love this product because it was delivered on time or because it was delivered faster. The products we love, or, well, I'm going to make a bold assertion here that delivering more crap faster was never, that's not where the value comes from. Let's start from the beginning. I think a lot of people have heard me talk, and a lot of people have seen me draw a model, and I'm going to start by drawing the same thing. I'm going to keep drawing it until I don't have to, until it's so dead obvious that I don't have to anymore. Also, this hand drawing thing, you're going to hate it or love it, but I got to get going here. If I'm shaking, tell me when I stop. Look, every Agile process I see seems to start with an idea or start with ideas. And if I see a process like Scrum, those ideas often get organized into a backlog, into a list of ideas. And if I look at common Agile practice, well, we work in short cycles where at the end of every cycle we build a little bit. Look, those cycles are terrific. They allow us to stop, allow us to plan that cycle, stop and measure, stop and inspect what we've done, make some changes, improve it, show it to people, and after a few cycles, the software grows, and it finally gets good enough that we can ship it into the outside world. We ship it, people get it, and everything is awesome. That's the Agile story, or that's an Agile process as we see it. A lot of it focuses around working software, and we've pushed a lot of quality and short cycles into this stuff. Now, long before I started with Agile development, I started in software development when I was 29 years old. I switched over from what I was doing before that and took my first job in software development, and I started at a small product company. We built software that was sold to other organizations. And my view of software development from the very beginning didn't quite work like this. My company was small, and, these ideas, for me, all started with my company and its product. And they started, for me, by paying attention to people that were using this product. We had a small company, and if we looked at people using our product, we had people that were unhappy, and we had people that were downright ticked off at us, and people that were confused and frustrated. And it's paying attention to those people and talking with those people, and that's where a lot of our ideas actually came from. Now, if you do this, if you're paying attention to the people that use your product, even if you don't have a product, if you're a startup and you're paying attention to customers you wished you had, those ideas could be for whole new products. But for us, those ideas were for additional features or enhancements. I'll be honest with you, a lot of the customers we were talking to were customers that our CEO and CEO also happened to be for this small company, was the guy that sold the stuff, and a lot of those feature requests or things that we were asked to look at were things that allow us to close this next deal. But even those ideas were all solutions to those customers and what they believed their problems were. Now, look, in software development, we eventually start referring to those things as requirements. Now, I learned very early on that, look, in spite of doing everything that people said, we could deliver, and sometimes things were awesome, and sometimes things were not so awesome, and sometimes things sucked, and people weren't entirely happy. And just that this was not as predictable as we hoped. It was hard enough to be predictable inside this loop. It was hard enough to pay attention to them. It was hard enough to finish everything we hoped we could on time. But even harder was being able to predict whether they'd be happy with, whether they'd use what we built. Now, when I draw this model, I want to label some parts of this thing here. It's everything between here and here, between the idea and the delivery. That's output. And software process concerns itself a lot with that. We pay attention to the output because it costs money. It takes time. In Agile development, we pay attention to how fast we build things. We track velocity, and we focus on, if you use a Scrum process, we focus a lot on predictability. We predict how much we can get done at the beginning of a sprint. We focus a lot on quality. We want to make sure this stuff is tested. We inspect it at the end of every sprint. But people have heard me do this before. That is not what matters. What matters is what happens when things come out. Now, the term I want to use for that is outcome. And if I measure output in terms of cost and time and velocity, and I look at predictability and quality, outcome is measured completely differently. We measure that in terms of people's behavior and what they do differently. Edwin just talked about this conference, and breaking even happened a couple weeks ago. And breaking even didn't rely on their team just getting everything done on time and promoting on time. Breaking even relied on you registering for the conference, enough people paying for it, relied on you and your behavior. The bet, the leap of faith that the conference made was that you would show up. And happily you did. But when we talk about software, not everybody shows up. Not everybody behaves the way we hope. That starts to be the problem. Now, we measure outcome in terms of behavior, people actually showing up, using, continuing to use, and say good things about our product. And once they use, we can start to look at their satisfaction. It's what happens when things come out that matters. Now, when I draw the model this way, it looks like it's all about making people happy. For me, I learned that was important. I had customers and users. But the model, for me, actually started back upstream at my business. My business had its own vision and its own strategy, however hazy it was at times, to get there. We had metrics internally, and if those were flat, stakeholders inside were unhappy, and that hopefully drove us to pay close attention to specific customers. When we follow this model all the way through, if you ship something and a few people use it, well, that's awesome. But if hundreds do, if thousands do, that's even better. That's when we start to feel the results back in our organization. That's when metrics here start to go up. That's when people inside this building or inside our building start to get happy. The word I want to use for this longer term benefit is impact. While we might measure outcome in terms of people trying and using our software, their behavior, impactful things are things like return on investment or brand awareness. Now, it's these things that are super important to our organization, but well, these things happen as a consequence of these things. We can ship a feature right away and start to measure if people try it and use it. We can start to talk with them about how they feel about it within days of getting something out there. But we can't ship something and measure within days if we got return on investment, or if we've changed brand awareness or customer satisfaction overall. These things are leading indicators. These things are lagging indicators. And this is the annoying thing, is no matter how fast we shorten these cycles, it's this long cycle between our organization trying to move a needle and this and the real impact. It doesn't matter how short your sprint is. Some things just can't be measured in a matter of weeks. And even for this conference, we can't measure the success of this conference until actually well after the conference is over. We can measure break even. But if people aren't satisfied with their experience here, well, that's going to affect whether they choose to come next year or not. When we talk about, well, if our role in software development is just building crap faster, we can constrain ourselves to making sure we understand those ideas and build them and make sure the people, if we call our customers the one who asked for the ideas, and if we call them our customers, that may be enough. But if we are product-centric, we're not just responsible for what goes on inside here, we're responsible for the whole thing. That's where my head has always been, and it's one of the things that's always made me uncomfortable, because there's so much of value in core Agile, but there's some things that, well, we were missing at the outset, and some things I'm happy to see that we're starting to include here. Now, one of the most challenging things and the most annoying things about this particular model is this stupid idea thing. The reason ideas, well, the problem with ideas is that everybody has them. And if I look at any of these people that are customers and users, they will have them. If I talk with stakeholders inside my building, they're going to have them. If we deliver successful products, this only gets worse. The more customers we have, the more ideas they have, and the more our business grows, the more stakeholders we have, and the more ideas we have. So look, that creates a huge amount of back pressure on this system, and for people who are responsible for building software, it feels like your job is just to build more crap faster. There is never going to be a shortage, and I promise you, if you double the speed that you build stuff, the number of ideas will quadruple or quintuple. So when it comes to ideas, look, there's always too many. And by always, I mean always, always, always. It starts to feel like your job is to build more stuff faster. And, well, I'm going to say it's a couple problems with these ideas is the nasty thing about these ideas is that we're usually wrong. They're not always good ideas. Now, ever since I've been in software development, people have cited statistics about failure rates of startups and features that are rarely or never used. Hey, for people here, anecdotally, what's the failure rate of a tech startup? Somebody shout to me. Yeah, everybody, I guess the conventional number is 90%, and I tried, like a lot of people did last night. I started looking for statistics to support what I believed. I didn't care about statistics that didn't. I found a couple, and I wanted to make sure that they were reputable. Look, for startups that have been funded, 92% of them fail over the next 3 years. And for venture-backed companies, 75% of them failed. It depends on who you look at. Now, I know the failure rate of businesses in general isn't that low. When we talk about these tech startups, we're talking about companies that are inventing something new, that are trying to actually get a new product on the market. That's what changes that. Now, ever since I've been involved with Agile development, people have cited this chaos report. It's old now, and I don't think it gets updated that much, or at least they don't publish results that much. But it's always cited the statistic that, anywhere between 60 to 75% of the features we put in existing products are rarely or never used. Now, don't cite this report ever like I just did, because it really is, or the numbers are based on just a small subset of, the first report I believe was based on 4 companies and internal IT applications. So these aren't consumer applications, it's got a narrow focus. But look, the point is that the people who asked for those features really thought that they worked. A lot of features we put into products feel like good ideas at the time. Now, I want to skip over this really quick. There is this guy that I follow behind a lot. In the product management community, he's a bit of a legend. He's been around a long time. He used to run product management for eBay. He started with eBay as the 3rd product manager hired and helped grow eBay up to the size that it is today. He left eBay in, I believe, 2008. He's got a book on product management called Inspired. Marty Kagan has a lot to say about digital product management. Now, I was talking with him, it's been a few years ago now. We were driving someplace, and he casually said to me that if you are really good at this stuff, you'll be right about 1/3 of the time. Now, I immediately inverted that number in my head, and I said, you mean if I'm really good at this stuff, I'm going to be wrong 70% of the time? And he said, well, no, that's only if you're really good. Most people aren't that good. And he's speaking from experience with eBay. Then I asked him for a formal quote that I could give. That look, most of what we build doesn't accomplish its objectives. Now, look, we're usually wrong, and let me give you the last problem with these ideas. Look, I looked this place up here. What do people know about Lightning Lab? And there are multiple startup accelerators that are in Auckland and New Zealand. Has anybody visited a startup accelerator before? I'm curious. Look, usually you walk into a startup accelerator and there's anywhere between 6, or in accelerators in San Francisco, I see 15, 20 startups in there, and they should feel like morgues. They should be completely depressing places. When you walk around them, you see lots of teams working in open spaces, and actually everybody seems pretty upbeat. Now, they're not stupid. They know that, 75% of them won't be in business next year. Many of them are working for no money, and many of them have mortgaged homes and other things to be there. And they all seem pretty happy for people who are about to fail. Now, this leads me to the other problem is there's too many ideas, we're usually wrong, and these people know that most startups fail, but they all are pretty confident that the failures won't be them. So we're usually wrong, and we don't know it. This starts to be the real problem. This means that if you're in software development, look, just building lots of bad ideas isn't a good idea. And in fact, one of the ways we create an awful lot of waste in software development is trying to build more stuff faster. In fact, your job is to focus on building less, is to minimize that output at the same time that we maximize that outcome and impact stuff. Now, I said outcome and impact. You could say business value or value. Look, I just want to add some sharpness to this, but we all know that value is what happens when things come out. Now, I want to unpack this center section here. Actually, let me unpack it a little bit down below. I'm trying to push too much into one picture, I think. Too much output here. Look, if I do this, look, when we ship something, what we hope is that everything is awesome. And every once in a while, we know that everything is, I'm going I'm going to talk about this, this top zone as the awesome zone, this bottom zone as the awful zone. Now, you know you've hit, you've hit awesome because, look, if you're a startup especially, your company grows and thrives. You know if you deliver a cool new capability into a product that people talk about it and they love it. And you know you've hit awful because you've got to find somebody to blame very quickly. You've got to roll it back very quickly. Everybody knows it was a mistake. The zone I'm most concerned about is this one right in the middle. I'm going to call this the thud zone. Now, thud is the sound a bowling ball makes when you drop it into wet grass. And I received this on a subject line of an email message from a startup I'd been working with years ago. It said in the message with the subject line thud that they had just released their first release of their product, and they were starting to get feedback from customers, and their customers were saying things like, it's a great start, and looks good for now, and tell us when you're going to be done, and can't wait for the next release. And all those things weren't awful. It's just that it meant most people weren't going to end up using the product. And for a startup that was venture capital funded, and for a startup that was running out of money, this thud is the same as awful, and it means you're going out of business soon. So look, I don't know if you know what the ratios are for your organization. We know that if you were a startup organization, the rate that you hit awful or thud is probably going to be on the good side of 75%. We know that the rate that leaves us with for hitting awesome is 25 to 30%. And what's interesting is in large organizations, we kind of start to think that we're immune to this. Or we think that feature by feature, we're going to hit awesome a lot. And in fact, we talk an awful lot about what the value is of backlog items as we put these things through. We should be kind of aware that we're not so good at predicting these things. And we ship a lot of features into products that just aren't as awesome as we thought they'd be. And in hindsight, once we see them working, we might be able to iterate them to success, but we sometimes wish we just hadn't have. Now, the bad news is these ideas suck, and there's a lot of them. The good news is there's kind of something we can do about it. There's a different kind of cycle that's emerged, and a lot of people here, I'm sure, are aware of it. Now, look, what we've started to learn is that this is true. There's no amount. It's like gravity. It's somewhat unavoidable. And the thing that we can do about it is actually learn faster. We learn a bit by shipping or creating something every short cycle. We learn an awful lot by shipping it. But if we focus on, if we know this, one of the things we start doing is creating one of our most important backlogs. This is a backlog that's built out of, it's built out of questions. It's built out of risks. It's built out of assumptions. It's built out of the things that scare us most. It's the things that keep us up at night. It's built out of what happens when we black hat our idea and say, what could possibly go wrong with this? If we take the ideas that we're building, and if we start with that idea, and we do a good job of building out what we think we should build, and we stop and we look at those risks and assumptions and we make a decision, we can back up and decide, I'm going to redraw this over here. Given these risks and assumptions, what would we need to learn to turn those risks, turn those assumptions into actual facts? And if we were going to learn something, how would we measure that in the outside world? What could we put in front of people to have them use to actually verify or validate that they actually wanted what we had, that they actually could use it, that it actually solved problems for them? And then, given we have some idea on how to measure it, what in fact would we build in order to do this? Now, look, I'm redrawing this build, measure, learn cycle. It's not an agile cycle. Everybody here has heard of that cycle, right? Most people have. I got it on the screen. Look, this cycle comes out of what process or what name process? Somebody shout to me. Lean UX, Lean UX, and I heard Lean Startup too. Actually, comes out of Lean Startup. Lean Startup. Lean Startup was originally the name of a blog and then a book from a guy named Eric Ries. Eric is someone that we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to Eric because he described, a different kind of cycle, of focus on learning fast. But Eric bugs the crap out of me because he really sucks at naming things. Now, this idea of building something with the intent to measure and learn something, and building the smallest thing we could to measure, Eric came from a startup that was failing. It had shipped a product and it had landed here. And for a startup, that means you're going out of business. So Eric happened to come from a startup. Eric borrowed some concepts from lean thinking, in particular the idea of shortening the cycle time around this build, measure, learn loop, not fixing it to 2 weeks or 1 week, but making it as quick as possible, because sometimes we can learn in hours, not days or weeks. So he borrowed some of lean, and he was a startup, but the concepts are not just for startups, and they don't use very much of lean. So other than the name being completely misleading, the concepts are super important. Now, if I look at what I've drawn so far, this cycle at the top, I'm going to call this, or this flow at the top, I'm going to call this a pay-to-build loop. And this cycle down here, I'm going to call this one, not surprisingly, a pay-to-learn loop. And that's what we're starting to inject and be a lot more deliberate about. When we start, focusing on these things makes it so that we can't be terribly dogmatic about Scrum. We can't, what a definition of done for learning isn't about quality, it isn't about making sure that it's tested, making sure that it can ship into our production software. A definition of done for pay to learn means that we've learned something that changes what we believed before. And in fact, it isn't important that we build anything production quality in this pay-to-learn loop. Let's see if I can move from here. Now, let me point out one other annoying thing. There are two important concepts lurking in here, and the annoying thing is they both have the same name. How many people use this term minimum viable product in their organization? How many people have learned to hate it over the past good? Now let me explain to you why I think you might hate it. This term has 3 definitions. Now if I were to ask you when you started using minimum viable product or MVP inside your organization, my guess is it may have been as early as 4 or 5 years ago, but probably not 10 years ago. The term does date back to 2001. It takes back to a guy named Robinson, and he's a product guy, and I'm going to paraphrase his definition, he defined minimum viable product as the smallest product that could achieve its desired market outcome. Let's call it outcomes. Now, look, literally, he talked about lowest risk for highest return on investment, and in my language, return on investment is more of an impactful thing. But really, he meant that it was successful. Now, there's 2 hard decisions to make here. We have to talk about who our desired market is. That's who are our customers and users. That's one of the hardest decisions we end up having to make. If you think about the first iPhone, that wildly successful product, if anybody owned, now it's almost 10 years old, the first iPhone, if anybody owned that first silverback iPhone, if I were to ask you what was the large customer segment that Apple left out, anybody know? Yeah, so good. I was shopping for business. Look, the security features, the things that larger corporations would need just weren't there. At the time the first iPhone was released, I was working with companies that were building trading software, that were building stock portfolio management stuff. And look, all those guys carried around BlackBerries, and they were forbidden to use an iPhone as a company phone or receive email on an iPhone. A lot of them carried one anyway, and so they ended up having two phones in their pockets, one for their personal use and one for business. Look, that wasn't oversight on Apple's part. Apple wasn't thinking, gosh, we just forgot about those business people. That was deliberate. And if they can choose a smaller market, in fact, that's the secret to this, is choosing a smaller market and deciding what success means. Well, there's an art there. It's easier to satisfy a smaller market than a larger market, and so choosing a minimum viable product was really locking in or getting what we'll call product market fit. And product market fit in a huge market is more difficult. This is hard, and it requires some strong product strategy. It requires decision making. Now, in this original definition of MVP, viable meant successful, and product, amazingly enough, actually meant product. Or product release, if we're talking about a next release of a product or a feature or a thing. Now, look, here's Eric Ries again, who ticks me off a bit, who said, look, this definition sucks. We released something and it landed here. It turned out it was not viable. It didn't achieve its market objectives, and we predicted wrong. And the biggest problem we have with this definition is that, well, we are just guessing. We don't know, and what we need is not a way to build this thing faster. What we need is a way to guess better. And he redefined in 2011 MVP, well, he redefined it to be something different. And I'm going to paraphrase him, as the smallest thing we could do or make to validate a product hypothesis. Say that again? It's different, and I'm glad someone said it. You don't have to, it's the complete opposite of this thing. Look, this, now what Eric means by viable, viable equals we learned something. And product, well, that equals test. Doesn't actually mean a product that we shipped, and it's out of lean startup language. We get things like, look, if you shipped your product and everybody loves it, then you shipped it too late. Because what Eric is talking about here is learning, and learning velocity, and not, effective. He's not talking about market outcomes here. To keep these two things straight in my head, the original definition, which is almost completely dead to us, I'm going to call this an MVP hypothesis because it's a hypothesis until we know for sure. And this one, an MVP test for now. Unfortunately, this common definition has been used for so long that it's starting to eclipse this original definition. But both concepts are critical. One of the hardest things to do is, well, what's going on in this first arc, to go from an idea to understand, to do what I'd call framing this thing, to understand who it's for, what it is, and why we're doing it, to understand users and their problems. To envision a solution. And then this last step I'm going to refer to as focus, to make a decision. We cannot solve all these problems. We cannot build all this solution. In fact, it becomes risky to do that. Focus, well, that's finding this first thing, making a decision about what we could possibly build. And then the trick is to say, okay, we are usually wrong. What are our biggest risks and assumptions? And look, the way we make an MVP small, or the way we choose to identify a small viable release, is to focus on a smaller market segment. The way we make an MVP test small is to focus on less to learn. We focus on our riskiest assumptions, the smallest things we could test. That allows us to learn faster. Building a test that focuses on learning everything, well, that's not minimum. That's not the smallest thing we could do. Now, the third definition is the one that arises out of the confusion between these two definitions. If I go back to that Agile idea, and if we go back to what words like viable and product commonly mean, well, nobody wants to ship an experiment, and nobody wants to learn. We want cash. We want things to be successful. So the third definition is the one that gets commonly used, and that's well, it's crap, but it works. Now, this definition often comes out of Agile Process, and this is sadly the anti-definition. It's the none of the above. It's the we're building it, and we know people aren't going to love it, and it's not going to make our company successful. It's too small to be this and too big and unfocused to be a test. Look, it's companies that start to deliberately understand that are actually able to deliberately learn, not accidentally learn. Now, I've been talking too long, and I want to give a couple examples. The examples I give are going to be about car companies. It's going to seem like I'm talking about car companies today, but look, this is a client that I've worked with before. It's a U.S. company called CarMax. You wouldn't necessarily know them here, but they actually happen to be the largest used car dealer on this particular planet. Now, they've got 160 locations in the U.S., and their sales were $14 billion last year. And look, they sell over 1 million cars a year. It's a lot of cars in 160 locations. So you can get a feel for how much they sell. They're a Fortune 500 company. They've always been one of Fortune magazine's 100 best places to work. So they're a pretty smart place, a pretty great place to work. They're a publicly held company, so they've got to be fairly public about the way they do things. Now, just because they're pretty great, it doesn't mean they do everything great. Now, it took me a long time to get permission from them to say bad things about them in public, but I did. Look, I looked up recently, or they were telling me recently about this thing called Uneasy Shop from CarMax. It was something they released. I just did a quick Google search and saw a lot of references in 2011. It was released to big fanfare. Now, I'm going to tell you, it was not a minimum viable product. It was a big bang release. There was a lot that it did, and they were going to revolutionize the way we did financing in the auto world. There were lots of press releases and lots of contests. They were asking customers to pitch in videos to show what they would do with all the extra time they had, not sitting in car dealerships doing financing. And there was a lot of cool things they did. But look, I clicked through on this release to their website and got that. The thing released, and it quickly went sideways. I had to go, if anybody's ever used the Wayback Machine, I had to go back to the Wayback Machine to find actually something on Uneasy Shop to show what even a screen looked like to get there. The problem with, it turned out that Uneasy Shop was an oxymoron. It was anything but easy. It was a finance application that only a finance manager could love, and even them not very much. Users couldn't use it. It was hard for them, hard for everybody. It did not make the car buying experience easy. They managed to quiet it down and quickly pull back from this stuff, and they gave it a quiet death. Now, this is one of those awful things. This is one of those things where they spent millions of dollars releasing this, promoting it, trying to start marketing this thing, and then finding out after they shipped it big, that it was going to be awful. Now, fortunately for CarMax, this created fertile soil for them to start focusing on a different way to do process, focusing on a way to validate before they build. Now, I want to tell just a little bit of a story about, this one team, and this is the auto finance team. Now, they look very grumpy in this picture, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. Now, I've got in the picture Beth, who is a product manager, and Archie, who is a UX person, but standing to my right, well, I took the picture, and there were people, the other development team there behind me. Eric is the lead developer of the team. I'll show a picture of him a little bit later, but it's important to note that those are executives there. And they talk an awful lot with their executives about what they're doing. And one of the ways that they frame how they're talking about things these days is using this thing. And I think some of you have started using things like this in your organization. This is written up on the wall. This is a hypothesis statement. It's not the we are going to build this and it's going to be done by Q2. It's the we believe if we build by providing this functionality to this type of user that they will do this. We'll see this outcome in the world and it'll benefit our company this way. Now, look, if I pick apart that hypothesis on the left, they believe that by providing, look, this person named Maureen. This is a quick and dirty, sketchy persona of Maureen. Now, Maureen is someone who buys a car, but the particular area of the market, the focus they have is on somebody who needs financing in order to buy a car, but actually is trying to buy sort of at the top end of, they want to get the coolest car they can for their budget, and once they kind of are aware how much they can finance, then they want to spend a bit of time looking. And well, they have a good understanding of who Maureen is, and they believe that providing someone like Maureen decisions on all vehicles. Now, what this means, you guys wouldn't know, you're not in the car business, but decisions means that Maureen will go to the website, she'll fill out a quick application, and she will get approved. Now, this isn't a pre-approval. This is really, really approved so that when she looks at the website, when she browses used cars, she'll be able to see she's definitely qualified to buy this car. This is the exact payment, and this is the exact rate, payment, and term that you can get on this car. Now, this turns out to be a pretty big deal. If CarMax wasn't as large as they wouldn't be able to pull it off because they have to change the way banks do lending. Right now, banks don't do lending until they have the car and the VIN number in hand for that car. This is why we go through this process of deciding what car we like and then turning into this uncomfortable sitting for a half hour to 2 hours with the finance guy after that. What they're trying to do is invert that. There's a lot of people inside of CarMax that really want to change this car buying experience so that we can tell you right up front what you're going to pay and you can shop in a relaxed way. They believe that by doing that people like Maureen will be more empowered to buy her car. She's going to save time, and they're going to see an increase in conversion. And even single-digit increases in conversion for a CarMax at the scale they're at means hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. At least tens of millions. I've got to do the math. But now, first off, if you're following me, if you imagine that experience, you fill out a quick application online, and now I can see all the cars I'm approved to buy and exactly what the payments are. That sounded pretty good to me. Does it sound pretty good to you? Yeah. So, look, a lot of people thought so. And look, they focus on, look, there's a lot of things they do to test their hypothesis. Let me draw one quick picture of this. If we look at a continuum of ways to test, experiments or tests, they range from fast and cheap to expensive and, time-consuming. I'm going to put at the far right here the one that we all know, and that's the potentially shippable software or production software. Now, if we talk about ways to test our ideas, building production software, that's about as much as you can possibly spend to do it. Now, on the fastest and cheapest route, we can look at things like interviewing customers. If one of our biggest risks is that customers really would appreciate that kind of a benefit, they get excited when they hear it. There's value in that. We can interview, and then, we can show them a prototype. Initially, something that's more of a vision prototype so they can see how it works, better envision it, and we can better assess value. We can focus a little bit on usability so we can create more usable prototypes. can use things like Axure, things like that. We can start to move up to prototypes that actually are functional and have they have code behind them. Somewhere in the middle, we could look at things like A/B tests. There's a wide range of things that we can do to learn. The fastest, cheapest things, get us a little bit of data and do pretty well. The most expensive things will get us perfect data, but cost an awful lot of money. CarMax routinely does this stuff. They do interview a lot of customers. They understand what they like. They understand what their problems. They use that to back up these personas they create for people like Maureen. After they learn enough, they validate a lot of assumptions about what they want. They build things like simple prototypes that show, look, if you go to the website, you fill out an application, it says you're approved. They work a lot with different ways to present the data, multiple lenders and payment options presented there, ways to search by payment type. Everybody who sees this thing, and I sat with them while they were doing this, seemed to really love it. But what was kind of weird is, we had been talking with customers before, and even the customers that looked at this prototype would show us the car they were looking for and how they looked. And when they started to look at this particular prototype, they seemed, they really loved it, but they wouldn't touch it. They treated it as a prototype. They weren't really engaged with the thing. Now, we felt like something was wrong here. We needed to be sure that they were engaging with it, and we upped the fidelity of this prototype. We had to build something that had code in it. Now, I've got a little bit of a recording of an interview. Now, this team uses a tool called Ethnio. As organizations get better at this stuff, there are more and more tools that allow us to find and get customers to talk to very quickly. Ethnio allows them to trap or grab somebody on their website who's looking for a car right then and ask them if they're willing to talk and then call them back. And that's what they do. Wow. We could, I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. It sounds like another earthquake is starting.
Hello, this is Matt.
Hey Matt, this is Archie Miller calling from CarMax. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Hey listen Matt, you had recently filled out a survey on our website saying that you might be able to help us with some research. Is that still the case?
Yeah, sure. Could you just hold on like 30 seconds?
Yeah, no problem. Take your time.
Anytime at roccoscollision.com.
Now, he's at work. So he has to put Archie on hold and run into the back room and sit down and talk to him. I don't know how many of you do these. I wanted you to feel what it's like to do this kind of, I'm going to refer to this as discovery work. This is learning work. This is how we finish a story about learning, and we actually execute this test.
Rocco's Collision Centers were driven to deliver impeccable results in record time every time.
Come on.
Our highly skilled
Hey, sorry about that.
Hey, it's no problem, Matthew. Do you prefer to go by Matt or Matthew?
Matt is
Okay, all right. So are you still in front of your computer?
fine. I am.
Okay, great. Let me tell you how we're set up here. First of all, I have you on a speakerphone. Can you hear me okay? Super. The reason I have you on a speakerphone is because in the room with me is our product manager, Beth.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great.
And so what we like to do is call folks who are using our website and just try to hook up with you and find out how things are going and to share ideas with you. That
Just need to pan around the room so you can see how Archie was lying. There's a lot of people in the room, and people come and go. At CarMax, they do these kinds of interviews all the time. The guy at the back of the room is Eric. He's the lead developer. Now, he's got his hands on the keyboard, not because he's listening, but because he's quickly making changes to the prototype so that it's pointing to exactly the cars that guy was looking at before the call. So he's got a little bit of work to do. And he's doing that on the fly while they're there. Now, I'm in the room and other people are in the room. It's critical to CarMax that lots of other people, interviews or these exposure to customers happen every single week at CarMax. They're discussed at every single stand-up meeting. Everybody knows they're coming, and team members are expected to listen in and take notes. Now, in these things, look, the way a typical interview goes is they start by talking with people about how they do things today. They're doing that not because they don't want to show their prototype, but because they want to validate they know who they're talking to and why.
I'm going to give you control so you can kind of scroll around. So you should be able to control that now if you want to try scrolling it. Just click inside the browser somewhere. There you go.
Yep, there you
You're all set. I just want to make sure that we're hooked up and ready to go. And so this is the website that we work on. I'm sure you're familiar with it. We're not salespeople. We don't work in marketing. We just work on teams that design this. And Matt, the stuff that we'll talk about today is not necessarily anything Beth and I have designed. So what
See, that's
we
another
really
lie,
like
too.
is
They did
some,
design it,
Real
but-
brutal honesty from you. And when you're talking about the different things that we look at, we love to hear bad news from people. So if you have anything to tell us, I just want you to feel free to speak your mind. Also, anything that you say is confidential, so we just keep it here on the product team just for our own research, all right?
Sorry.
It'll take about 20
Just
minutes.
do not
and then
trust
at the
product
end,
people.
We'll send you a gift card for Amazon.
I want to get to a bit of a moment of truth here, and I know I want to leave time for questions, and I've got to make a point about what they're learning here. They spend a bit of time talking with him about the way he buys cars.
Okay.
Okay.
And then specifically, I wanted certain things. I would probably did that. That's probably it.
Okay.
Or others. Probably this one too, which I didn't notice before.
Okay.
And then that's really it.
So do you have a budget in mind that you're looking to stay around?
I do.
Okay.
And they're all right around it. It's 40, give or take.
Okay.
And they're all pretty much right around there anyway.
Yep.
Now, they work with him for a bit while he's looking for cars, and they know what kind of cars he's looking at. Eric is quickly making changes to the live production, the live website, so that he can show in his prototype something that's looking at live data. And, well, it's a cool story about how he jimmied together a prototype that showed real finance data. But they need to get this guy in the mode where he's really looking so that they can then ask him, well, they're doing a value test. This isn't a usability test. They need him to try on this idea for size.
Okay, I'm going to take control just 1 second just to go through this role-playing exercise real quick, Matt. Let's say that you went on our site, and this is an example of what an online application might look like, the different types of things that we would ask. And let's say you went online, you filled this out, and then you have an apply button. And after you hit an apply button, you get an immediate response. So I wanted to show you what that response would be and then get your reaction to that, all right?
Okay.
So let's say you fill out the application, you hit apply, and this page comes up. Can you give me your reaction to this?
You're pushing me into a car. That's my initial reaction.
Okay.
You know what?
Now, what started to happen when people started seeing finance data with the cars that they wanted to buy is their reaction changes were profoundly different. Suddenly, they felt pushed. Suddenly, they started. Well, their job was no longer about, is this the right car for me, but are those good rates? And are those the rates that my bank would offer? And should I start competing these rates? And I'm not sure I trust CarMax because, look, I see lower advertised rates elsewhere. And, well, what they found is that by providing all this financial stuff, it didn't empower people or help them make decisions faster. It took a tough decision and made it even tougher. This is turning out to be not so easy and super annoying. And they saw this, that was the first experiment that I set into where we got a negative reaction. We thought, okay, well, it's just this guy. Let's try this with other people and let's change it. And after lots of iteration, boy, the reactions that people were getting were consistently in the thud zone. This is why these people look so unhappy. This is what they're talking about. And when I told you that this thing working out, or that hypothesis panning out, was worth millions of dollars, it is worth tens of millions of dollars. And CarMax is publicly held. There's a large board of directors, and all of them are looking forward to a time when they can actually cite earnings projections for this thing, and they're learning right now that they can't, that this isn't going to be awesome, that this isn't going to be awful, but they need to move with caution. As a result, this idea was, it was killed off before it went too far. Or, look, the guy in charge of finance there still loves this, still wants this, still talks about it, but it's moved way to the bottom of the backlog, or what they refer to as the way backlog. And it's just not their most important opportunity. It's going to be a tough nut to crack. Now, the good thing about CarMax is, this is a convention there. This is the way that they work. Now, I wasn't kidding when I talked to you about when I started here that I've got an hour and a half's worth of content to cover, but let me make last couple points and put this together. I wanted to talk about what learning is and what a learning cycle looks like compared to what a development cycle looks like. Now, look, when we talk about a continuum of how much we can spend on tests, we change these, or our minimum viable product test changes over time, and it changes along with our confidence. There is a safe zone kind of right up the middle here, where as our confidence that we are right increases, and it feels better to increase the amount we spend. Now, if our confidence is low, meaning, we're not sure. Look, if you work for a company and you're working on building something, but you would not bet lunch that it's going to be successful, that's what I mean by low confidence. And if you're building production software for it, I put you down here. Below this curve is the stupid zone. This is stupid and expensive. Now, if you're building a paper prototype for something that is a slam dunk, that you know you just need to get out there quick, you're up here. This is also stupid, but it's just wasting time. The trick is knowing which. The trick is knowing that there is a safe zone right up the middle. And the trick with learning velocity and figuring out how to learn fast is knowing how to figure out what your next best test is. For organizations that have got this down, they haven't delegated all this learning stuff to the product manager and the product owner. For organizations that do this well, they expose their learning as they've got opportunities that they're working on, and they have biggest risks and biggest assumptions that are important for them to focus on. It's common to see things like task boards that show risks and assumptions along the top, and things that we've got to do to validate those things. If we're working in an Agile environment, it's common to see working software. But look, in an environment like CarMax's, it's common to see working hypotheses and the residue of that. And lots of boards at CarMax are covered with the work they do to make their hypotheses and their current work visible. It's not nearly as visible as working software. And maybe last but not least, for organizations that do this stuff, it isn't just the stuff that the product manager is doing to get stuff ready, it's work that the whole team can participate on. Let me give you my last key points here. That if learning is a first-class activity, the backlog that starts to be important is that backlog filled with questions, assumptions, risks, and like all backlogs, it's the scariest stuff at the top that matters most. If our whole team is focused on outcome and impact, then look, we involve the whole team in talking about what those risks and assumptions are and what that next best way to test them is. And it isn't, the whole team is aware of that safe zone and that building production software isn't the cheapest way. We continuously reflect on what we've learned. We continuously manage that risks and assumptions backlog. And then finally, because we're never sure, we're as confident as we can be when we go to production and we ship this stuff, we plan on measuring after we release. It's a lot more I wish I could say, But look, what I wanted to talk about is learning as a first-class activity. And with more and more of the teams that I work with, it is. And more of the teams that I work with, it is not the product manager trying to feed the beast and get more stuff to the team. It's the whole team focused on that activity of learning and that activity of development. I'm going to stop there and use the last 7 minutes I've got for any questions. Thanks for listening to all this stuff.